So, I recently finished playing Prey. No, not Prey, but Prey. Yeah, that one. I've heard of Prey before, but I've never played it. And I'd also seen a lot of promotional videos for Prey 2 over the years, which looked quite amazing. But most recently, Prey released. Yeah, that one, the new Prey. The one developed by Arcane and not Human Head Studios. But I began thinking to myself that I wanted to finally try to play through Prey, the old one, since everyone was in a huge hubbub about the new one, and the cancellation of Prey 2, and the fact that the new Prey has nothing to do with the old Prey. Before I played Prey, the original, and made this video, I'd held the idea that, sure, it's disappointing that Prey 2 was cancelled, and Bethesda is scummy for doing so. I always hate seeing games get killed for no good reason, but after I beat Prey, my opinion became more hostile? That might not be the correct word. Maybe I should say that it became less forgiving. Straight up killing a game is bad, and many publishers have done this, namely EA, but as well, Bethesda is well known for some extremely shady practices, such as shafting the developers that they've signed contracts with by stating that certain developers aren't meeting certain milestones, refusing payment for milestones, threatening to cancel production, and then having ZeniMax, Bethesda's parent company, buy up the developer to pay for the unpaid milestones. There's a few well-known and obvious examples of this, such as with Prey 2 and Bethesda's relationship with Human Head, Bethesda's relationship with the developer MADia, who developed Echelon, and in which you can read the open letter from the lead designer of MADia here. Bethesda's relationship with Obsidian, which boiled down to Obsidian only receiving royalties for Fallout New Vegas if it had a Metacritic score of 85 or higher, and New Vegas only got a Metacritic score of 84. And as we all know, this score is bullshit because Metacritic is retarded. Modern game journalists are retarded, and bribed out the ass. And New Vegas is obviously the superior modern Fallout game, despite cut content, bugs, and Bethesda only giving Obsidian a year to develop New Vegas, as opposed to Bethesda's own technically 4-year development time for Fallout 3. Aside from this, Bethesda's also a shit developer. I know that many people love Skyrim, many people love Fallout 3, and many people love Fallout 4, but my opinion has always been that those games are shit. Bethesda is a scummy publisher, a bad developer, and people keep letting them get away with it all. I'm just a guy that makes YouTube videos about video games for fun, and therefore I have like a dozen people that actively watch my shit, so my opinion will have approximately 0% influence on anyone. But I still don't understand how any developer could be desperate enough to work with Bethesda or ZeniMax. With so much negative history, you would expect that no one would want to work with or for Bethesda, but people keep doing it anyways. But I'm not here just to talk shit about Bethesda, although they do deserve it. But I also want to go over Prey, because I really do think it's worth playing and experiencing. And plus it has an incredibly gut-wrenching ending that hit me really hard. If I have the patience and time, I may do a video on the new Prey to draw comparisons between the two. For now, let's talk about Prey. As usual, there will be spoilers throughout the video, so if you want to play Prey first, I would recommend it. You can buy Prey through Amazon or eBay or whichever to activate it on Steam, but I would honestly recommend buying it through a reseller like G2A or something. But if you torrent it, I won't tell anyone. It's not like Human Head is going to get your money now anyways. The game's practically abandonware. Anyways, let's begin. Prey starts you off in a dingy bathroom. Here you see yourself in the mirror. You get to play as Tommy. I wouldn't blame you if you thought this was actually Randy Pitchford at first. It's quite confusing as both Randy and Tommy lament about being with their respective girlfriends and or significant others. Although for different reasons, of course. Tommy hates living on the reservation and just wants to run away with his girlfriend. Randy, on the other hand, just wants to run away from his girlfriend, or wife, rather. I don't blame the guy, well, either of them really, but Tommy's grandfather goes on about how his girlfriend, Jen, would prefer to stay on the reservation because she's with her people, and Jen goes on about how she wants to stay with her people.
This is my home. My job is here. My family is here. Do you think you're saving me by taking me away?
These two crackers start cracking wise, and you crack some skulls. After that, aliens abduct you, your grandfather, and your girlfriend. All the while, Don't Fear the Reapers being played on the jukebox, and this is where the real game begins. There is a variety of different aspects to Prey's gameplay, from the general gunplay to various implementations of portals and gravity-bending rooms and puzzles, as well as the ability to enter a spirit realm, which gives the player the ability to proceed through certain areas that would otherwise be inaccessible, while also giving you the ability to traverse unseen by enemies and solve puzzles which would otherwise require 2 people. There's various sections which require vehicles to proceed, and there's a nice array of enemies that span from bosses to weird dog creatures. We'll cover all of this and more, but I want to start with Prey's weapons. Each weapon has a primary and secondary function, with varying degrees of usefulness. First and foremost, you have a wrench. Your primary fire swings horizontally, while your secondary fire allows you to hold and charge for an overhead attack. The wrench is not too uncommon as a first weapon to have in a myriad of first-person shooters nowadays, but honestly I think that I used the wrench maybe twice outside of the opening scene in the bar. You never run into any situation afterwards which really requires its subsequent use, unlike in say Bioshock or System Shock, where the wrench is mostly perfectly a viable weapon to use throughout the game. This doesn't bother me though, because the rest of the weapons work perfectly fine. I'm not so cynical as to ask why it should even be included in the first place if it has almost no use outside of reminding the player that Tommy is in fact a mechanic. I just don't have it left in me to care about that, especially since the other weapons are a lot more useful and a lot more interesting. The next weapon that you receive is called the Hunter Rifle. The primary fire shoots like a standard automatic rifle, while the secondary fire attaches some sort of ocular appendage to allow you to zoom in with the weapon. While in this mode, your rifle becomes semi-automatic, but outputs more damage per shot compared to the automatic fire mode. But as well, this mode consumes more ammo. So while the sniper mode does more damage initially, the automatic mode will do more damage over time for the same amount of ammunition. After this, you obtain the leech gun, which, unlike the other weapons in the game, doesn't require pickups for ammunition, but rather requires you to draw in energy from various nodes throughout the levels with the secondary fire. Although it could be argued that this replaces a secondary fire with nothing more than an ammo pickup, the gun does essentially have 4 different ammo types. The first one being plasma, which is indicated by nodes with a red glow. Plasma shoots fast-moving balls of fire, which don't do much damage but does have a fair capacity within the leech gun itself. The second ammo type is ice, which is indicated by a light blue glow. Ice has a much smaller range but a bigger damage output, and as well it can slow or outright freeze enemies. The third ammo type is lightning, which is seen on nodes with white sparks. Lightning carries only about 6 shots per charge, but it does an immense amount of damage and can kill common enemies in a single shot and bigger enemies in 2 or 3. And lastly, there's Sunbeam, which is seen with an orange glow. This comes later on in the game, but it does a huge amount of damage, allows you to shoot a constant beam from the leech gun, and has a fair capacity. Instead of standard grenades, the game opts for small green creatures called crawlers. You can rip off all of their legs and throw them like a standard grenade, which will explode in a few seconds, or you can press the secondary fire to flip the crawler and rip off only one leg, which makes the crawler act more like a proximity mine. I like to use this mode to stick them to enemies. Next up is the autocannon, which you get during a fight with a mini-boss. This is somewhat like a combination between a minigun for the primary fire and a grenade launcher for the secondary. The next weapon you get is the acid sprayer, which is essentially a shotgun that shoots acid with a secondary fire that launches an entire container of acid at enemies. Lastly, for the normal weapons, you get the crawler cannon, which is a primary function like a rocket launcher and a secondary function that deploys a shield that stops all projectiles. Aside from this, you're also accompanied by your previous pet and current spirit animal Talon, who acts as a guide throughout the levels of Prey. And as well, you can distract enemies for easy kills. The types of enemies that you'll see throughout Prey include a ballsack that erupts from turrets, Jews, your typical inbred, some guy that masturbates too much, some guy that can't masturbate at all. Weird looking bug creatures that climb through wall vaginas, the alien from Alien, the cyber demon from Doom. I don't even know what the fuck that is, and your mother. I like the enemy designs, as everything looks like some grotesque meat mashed with machinery. I get tired of fighting so many hunters all the time, but most of the other enemy variants are fun to fight, and have their own strategies and weapons which require you to fight around. I especially like fighting against the mutated humans, because they've caught me off guard looking like a candidate for my 600-pound life, while moving at the speed of a hungry Kenyan who just saw food. One aspect of the gameplay mechanics in Prey that I really like are the respawn mechanics. Instead of loading the last save and taking a few seconds or quite a few seconds to do so, Prey gives you the ability to death walk. Basically, once you die, the game transports you to a spirit realm where you have to kill red or blue spirits with a bow. Doing so refills either your health with the red spirits or your spiritual energy with the blue ones. And after a few seconds, you're dragged through a hole in the ground and back to life near where you initially died. I enjoy this mechanic a lot more than a simple reload mechanic that many other games have. It feels like it loads faster, plus it keeps you actually doing something. So you're not just sitting, staring at a screen for a few seconds while the game loads. It helps keep the pacing up through areas with a lot of action. Some have stated that their issue with the mechanic is that it makes boss fights a bit too easy, and I pretty much agree. While I love that it makes death a lot less frustrating by simply tossing you back into the game and not forcing you to redo minutes worth of progress, it's quite easy to simply kill a few enemies, die, respawn with full health, and continue where you left off. The death walk would feel a bit more challenging if bosses regained some more health whenever you respawned, and maybe this mechanic could have been implemented on normal enemies as well. Although, with this you would have to tread carefully, lest you make the same mistake that Bioshock Infinite did with the Ghost Mom fight.
This is particularly noticeable during the ghost fights later in the game on harder difficulties, where the bullet sponge boss will regenerate a huge amount of health once the player dies. Combining this with infinitely respawning enemies has to be one of the stupidest design decisions I've ever seen.
You don't want to accidentally create something miserable when you didn't intend to. But the current system of Prey works well enough, and I would say, don't fuck with it if you don't have to. Sort of my version of, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. The spirit walking throughout the game is interesting as well. Partway through the game, Tommy gets the ability to spirit walk, basically allowing his spirit to roam around while his body is suspended midair. This ability allows you to traverse areas that you may not have otherwise been able to reach, such as walking through force fields or crossing spiritual bridges to allow your physical self to proceed. As well, you can use a bow in this form to attack enemies at the cost of spiritual energy, which you replenish by killing enemies and absorbing their souls. The spirit walking mechanic doesn't make sense if you really think about it. For instance, you can press buttons while in this form, but you can't open doors that you could go through physically. Enemy fire doesn't hurt you, but you can pick up ammo. It's not too big of a deal to draw me out of the game, but I'm sure someone's thrown a hissy fit over it. So I thought I would at least bring it up. Speaking of traversing the levels, there's a generous amount of gravity-bending rooms strewn throughout the game. Early on, one of the main things you'll run into are walkways that allow you to walk normally on them, up walls or even upside down. Typically, you'll see enemies on these paths before you reach them, and then more enemies spawn once you're on the walkway yourself. It's a small detail, but it's very satisfying to kill an enemy and watch their lifeless body drop off of the walkway and onto the ground. Other types of gravity-bending rooms include panels that, once shot, change the downward gravity towards that direction. Several rooms include fights with enemies that will have the panels littering walls, ceilings, and floors, all the while you're trying to kill the enemies and traverse to the next objective. Sometimes the quick changes in perspective can be downright dizzying, but I'm a schmuck for rooms and levels that allow you to bend it at your will. Throughout the game, you'll be required to use your spirit walking ability to activate certain gravity-defying buttons and switches, so it can be pretty rewarding to have to use a bit of your wits in a game that very initially looks like just another shooter. As well, Prey includes portal technologies, which, well, they act like portals. They're used to spawn enemies in, as well proceeding through the levels. Unfortunately, you don't get the freedom to move these portals at your will, like in the game Portal. Most portals are static, with a small number of them given the ability to move via switches on computers. The last aspect to the gameplay that I want to cover is the vehicle sections of the game. They're actually intertwined very well with the standard on-foot sections. It's incredibly effortless and fluid to switch between walking and flying in a spaceship. This helps glue the general shooter mechanics with having full control in a 3D space together almost flawlessly. The ships are arcadey, so don't expect advanced controls, but what's included is velvety and straightforward. But all you really do in a ship is fly around, shoot rockets, and occasionally use your tractor beam to move objects, although you can also use it to fling enemies against walls as well. It's not an incredibly intuitive or complex gameplay mechanic, but it gels so incredibly well with everything else. I just love it. That's essentially it for the gameplay mechanics, but compared to even many modern shooters today, there's enough here that's well put together the game hardly ever feels bland. I would say the only parts of the game that feel slow are the story bits whenever they crop up. I'm sure for some people that it's a nice change of pace to break up some of the fighting, but for me, I just want to keep killing fucking aliens! Oh man, I'd better calm down before ICE offers me a job. Speaking of stories though, let's talk about Prey's story. Broken down, I'm sure someone would simplify Prey's story down to being just a trope about a man saving a damsel in distress while enacting revenge on the bad guy. And sure, I guess you could, but there were so many other small bits and pieces that I just couldn't help but enjoy the characters and what was going on in the world of Prey. So starting from the beginning, you play as Tommy, of course, and all he wants to do is escape his reservation with his girlfriend and live a normal life. Disaster strikes, and you, your girlfriend, and your grandfather all get abducted by aliens. Naturally, this just pisses you off. So, you're freed before you're harvested, and you grab a weapon and start shooting until everything is dead. This is basically the story. What I liked most was building up your character, your grandfather's character, and your girlfriend's character, all after you've been abducted and gone through hell. I enjoyed Tommy's slow acceptance of his native heritage to utilize it to fight against the aliens. I think that more games should merge native folklore and history into more modern or futuristic settings. How many games really have native characters or protagonists to begin with? There's, the Turok games, which are badass, Assassin's Creed 3, I'm pretty sure that Red Dead and gun games have natives in them, Custer's Revenge, although, let's be honest, Custer's Revenge will never be topped by any game, ever. I'm sure there's plenty of real-time strategy games that have native factions in them, like Age of Empires or something. I mean, it's not a big deal, but I just think that spirits and smoking peyote is cool. Anyways, I also like that Art Bell shows up in the game.
Getting some reports of strange lights in the sky in the Oklahoma area. Our affiliate in Oklahoma City is telling us that the state police, get this, are reporting mysterious lights all over the area.
I mean, it's just through a radio broadcast, but he has conversations with people describing the alien ship, and eventually one of the aliens contacts him and they talk. For those who don't know, Art Bell is a broadcaster and author who is famously known for his paranormal radio program called Coast to Coast AM, a show which dealt with various conspiracy theories and paranormal incidents. Much of the time, Art would host callers who would provide a multitude of personal anecdotes and stories relating to the topic at hand. He would have skeptics, famous scientists, quasi-scientists, or the occasional Area 51 worker.
You can't spend a lot of time on the phone, so give us something quick.
Okay, okay, what we're thinking of as aliens are, they're extra-dimensional beings that an earlier precursor of the space program made contact with.
It's really cool to hear Art Bell in this game, and the inclusion of a real-life broadcaster who is related to the subject matter of the game really tickles me sideways. The backstory to the game is kind of interesting and explains the title of the game. Basically, all life forms on Earth are just cattle that have been cultivated for food by the aliens of the ship, which is called the Sphere. At the helm of the Sphere is a previous human who was deemed powerful, and a god by the creators of the ship. So she was basically given full control, but the power corrupted her. And now that you've come along, she's trying to goad you to take her place. So naturally you kill her and you start to get drunk on power. But your grandfather helps you overcome it and you plunge the ship into the sun. Oh yeah, and your girlfriend dies. It was actually kind of gruesome. Speaking of gruesome, let's talk about the graphics. Of course, the game looks a bit dated by this point. It has some low-resolution textures, it has some low-polygon models, but it does have some pretty good lighting, and some great disgusting art direction. Prey uses the EdTech 4 engine, which was used in Doom 3, Quake 4, Enemy Territories Quake Wars, Brink, and etc. What makes Prey different from those other titles is that EdTech 4 was modified to allow the use of portals, shifting gravity, and for creating the wall-walking platforms. What I probably enjoy most out of Prey in terms of graphics, though, is the harmonization between metallic and organic textures throughout the environment. Part of it just makes me feel sick, especially the vagina walls. I will say, though, this game was a bitch and a half to record. You might have noticed that a top portion of the game is cut off. Yeah, that was because I had to record the game in windowed mode. But the problems initially started when I was simply trying to record the game. At first, DX Story worked, but it would cut my frame rate in half. Fraps wouldn't even recognize the game, and I was initially too lazy to make an account to use NVIDIA Shadowplay or Share or whatever they want to call it now. I was thinking of using OBS because I've heard that it works great, but I was too lazy to download it and set it up, so I just used GeForce Experience and made an account. At first it worked perfectly fine. It didn't drop my frames, the file sizes were small, and the quality was pretty good. Then GeForce Experience decided to update, because it requires that apparently. Afterwards, the Shadowplay Share feature just wasn't there anymore. I looked it up and some people said that you just have to restart your computer, but that didn't work. Some people said to reinstall GeForce Experience, but that didn't work. Some people said to use DDU and uninstall your graphics drivers, reinstall GeForce Experience, and then it would work. But it didn't. By then I was fed up and was running late for work like the normie that I am, so I left it. I came home that evening and Shadowplay worked fine. I don't know if this is a common issue with GeForce Experience, but I wish NVIDIA would just stop fucking things up. But anyways, after that started working again, Prey would launch in full screen mode, but it wouldn't let me change my resolution, and any attempts at doing so would reset the game back to 640 by 480. So I ran it and windowed and it worked, save for the top of the screen getting cut off. So yeah, the game looks pretty good, and I would say compared to a lot of games nowadays, and especially compared to most first-person shooters that use Unity. But goddamn if you ever try to record it. Good luck. I should have just used OBS. Prey's soundtrack was developed by Jeremy and Julian Soule, the former of which is often called the John Williams of video game music. Overall, the soundtrack for Prey is very orchestral, and for the most part, it does sound pretty great. I like that many of the tracks feel like they have a bit of a Native American vibe to them. I generally like the music while listening to it outside of Prey, but I can't help but hold the thought that it kinda feels out of place throughout a majority of the game. The soundtrack feels very grandiose or adventurous, maybe something that would play during a cinematic or while exploring the wilderness, like in The Elder Scrolls V Skyrim, and oh, wait! Would you look at that? Jeremy Soule is also the composer of Skyrim, Oblivion, Morrowind, and a handful of other RPGs, with those games having more of an emphasis on exploring and taking in your surroundings. Jeremy Soule's style of music can really help enrich those styles of games. And like I said, it's nice, but I don't think that it fits with the atmosphere of Prey. Prey's environments are grotesque, and the situations that the main character finds himself in can hardly be called whimsical or adventurous, which I get the sense of whenever I listen to Prey's soundtrack. I would prefer it if the soundtrack was just a variety of hard rock tracks to kill aliens to. It would make me feel a bit more of a badass, not that Tommy has any trouble being a badass anyways, but it would help. Although, on top of Jeremy Soul's music, Prey is littered with jukeboxes that allow the player to listen to a variety of licensed music, such as Barracuda by Heart, Cat Scratch Fever by Ted Nugent, and of course Don't Fear the Reaper by Blue Oyster Cult. Prey had a fairly rough development cycle. Before we had Prey that was developed by Human Head Studios, that we know and love today, Prey actually had a previous incarnation, conceived by 3D Realms back in 1995. Tom Hall, who had previously worked with id Software, was right off of working with Apogee Software on Rise of the Triad. He had outlined a variety of different designs for Prey, such as the abduction aspect. Although, after a year of work, he left the company to form Ion Storm with John Romero. Afterwards, 3D Realms employed Paul Shuitema to initiate the next step of the game's development. The team would maintain the abduction aspect to the game, but expanded on the idea by having it set in an immense alien ship that would be inhabited by multiple alien races, 3 of which would be collectively named as the Trokara, and the 4th which would be called the Keepers. The protagonist himself would be Talon Brave, a Native American hero. The game was innovative in its genre by being the first to employ movable portal technology, which allowed rips in space to be created, shifted, and reformed in real time. This mechanic, alongside destructible environments, was intended to be the main features. Everything was moving along great. Demonstrations at E3 in 1997 and 1998 drew widespread acclaim and attention. Public perception of the game at the time was very positive. Unfortunately, the game started to fall apart, and due to technical issues, the game grinded to a halt. The head engineer, William Scarborough, would later state that, in hindsight, portal tricks such as these should be used as tricks, not as an engine paradigm. 3D Realms attempted to reinvigorate the project with a new team after Paul Shuitema's version dissolved. In November of 1998, 3D Realms hired Corinne Yu, who worked exclusively by herself on the game engine, although this iteration of Prey 2 was doomed to fail. And thus, after this, the game experienced an extended period of lethargy in 1999. Although it wasn't technically cancelled, the game was put on indefinite hold. In 2001, 3D Realms began development on a new version of Prey. This time around, the necessary portal technology had become a stable and functional component with all modern 3D game engines. 3D Realms licensed the technology as opposed to developing it, and they chose id Tech 4 from id Software. 3D Realms then commissioned Human Head Studios, who had previously developed the game Rune, to continue development of Prey, using pre-existing designs as a framework going forward. Prey was officially announced by 2K Games on April 26th of 2005, and on April 28th of 2006, the release date was announced for July 10th. Prey had, at the time, utilized Triton for digital distribution, which, unfortunately, they went out of business only months after Prey had released. Afterwards, they began to use Steam as its digital distribution platform. The reason that Prey is no longer available for purchase through Steam nowadays is because, apparently, they ran out of keys to sell. I read that the way they generated keys for Prey actually just stopped working, and to fix the issue, it would require a massive code rewrite. Unfortunately, it's 2K that handles distribution, and they ran out of keys back in 2009. So if you officially want to get a copy of Prey, I would recommend G2A or Amazon while people are still selling them. That's essentially it for Prey 2006. There is a multiplayer mode that came with the game, but it looks like it's dead now, and I read that it wasn't nearly as good as Quake anyways. Overall though, Prey is an incredibly fun game, and even though I played through it twice, almost back to back for this video, I can honestly say that I didn't really get tired. Although I have fun playing most of the games that I've made videos for, I typically play through the game twice to try and make sure that I cover everything, or at least everything that interests me. And the second playthrough usually starts off fine, but sometimes I have to force myself to grit and bear to finish recording a game, because I just played it and I know what's gonna happen. I'm not sure if it's due to the length of Prey or just that it's so goddamn fun, but even though I knew where basically everything was and where to go, I still had a blast through and through. Just to recap though, the game has some really fluid gameplay with some very interesting mechanics that help it stand out against even more modern first-person shooters, such as the gravity walkways, the ability to change gravity in a room, portals, and some minor puzzle elements. All of these were done wonderfully and they worked together incredibly well, and I was constantly looking forward to what would come in the next room. The guns, although it could be argued are somewhat archetypal, had some cool secondary abilities and some great art design. The graphics were grotesque with a sublime blend between organic and metallic environments, with some pretty great lighting effects. The actual soundtrack itself was pretty great, but its implementation within the game itself felt at odds with the setting, environment, and the mood that the game overall portrays. Like I said, a bit more hardcore rock melodies or more memorable tracks would probably have helped out a lot more than the more temperate soundtrack provided by Jeremy Soule. Despite Prey's sordid development cycle, I believe that the final product is a polished, fun, and overall enjoyable experience that, if you're a fan of first-person shooters, you should definitely give it a shot. It's more than can be said about other games that have gone through development hell. I'll provide links in the description below where you can currently purchase Prey, but if anything, I would honestly recommend just getting it through G2A, because from what I've seen, that's the cheapest route. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed my video here. I'm not completely sure what's going to be next, as this video was more of an off-the-cuff type of thing, and I've barely begun production on the video that was actually planned to come after Oni. I do know that eventually I'll get around to making a video on Prey 2017, and possibly comparing the two. Although looking around the internet, there's already quite a few videos that do just that. As well, I do intend to play through Human Head Studios' previous title, Rune, which I'm hoping is as fucking brutal as it was the years ago that I played it. But either way, I hope you enjoyed the video, and don't forget to follow me on Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, Facebook, Tinder, Grindr, MySpace, YouTube, LinkedIn, WordPress, Google, Pornhub, RedTube, Reddit, FunnyJunk, 4chan, 8chan, LaneChan, Tumblr, RedTube, Reddit, FunnyJunk, 4chan, 9gag, and so much more! Don't forget to donate to my Patreon for exclusive content. Also, fuck Bethesda.